Welcome everyone to this webinar, Exploring Career Paths, Community-Based Research. I'm Amy Miller, President of the PhRMA Foundation, and I'm happy to have you with us today. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the events today, and the presentations we'll have two speakers presenting about the Robert A. Winn Diversity in Clinical Trials Award Program, and then I'll moderate a question and answer session. Please note that we do have a Q&A button down at the bottom. Please submit your questions through that. First, I'd like to introduce the PhRMA Foundation. I'm excited to have you here today as we launch a new webinar series designed to bring the various talent pipeline programs of our industry partners to you, our audience. Every year we have about 400 applicants for 40 awards, and we wanted to give back to the rest of the excellent applicant pool, and this is one of our attempts to do just that. The PhRMA Foundation is a nearly 60-year-old nonprofit that offers grants and fellowships to early career academic researchers working in drug delivery, drug discovery, translational medicine, value assessment, and health outcomes research. Since our founding, we have given out over 110 million in grants to over 2,700 grantees, representing over 300 different institutions across the United States. The foundation recognizes the importance of improving diversity in clinical trials and biomedical research more broadly. We seek to attract a diverse group of applicants. Here are some photos from our last awardee round. Our applicants are about half women and about half people of color. But we do know that we can continue to improve our diversity, and we see this as critical to reducing health disparities across the health ecosystem. While the foundation works to start our own grant program aimed at addressing issues around diversity in clinical trials, we wanted to take this opportunity to highlight the Robert A. Winn Diversity in Clinical Trials Award Program, which is run by Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation, Virginia Commonwealth University, and the American Association for Cancer Research. This program's awards are specifically for medical students and investigator physicians. Since some of our foundation's applicants and awardees do fit this mold, we wanted to make sure that all of you had a chance to learn about these exciting programs. I'm going to introduce both of our speakers before passing it over to them. Catherine Grimes is a Senior Director of the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation. She directs the Robert A. Winn Diversity in Clinical Trials Award Program, which seeks to train over 250 community-oriented clinical trialists from diverse backgrounds in 5 years, which I think that's incredible, 250 trainees in 5 years. Dr. Joy Jones is the Chief Program Officer at VCU Massey Cancer Center, where she runs the Robert A. Winn Diversity and Clinical Trial Award Program. I will hand it over to Catherine, our first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and to the PhRMA Foundation for inviting us to present on this marquee program here from the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation. Good afternoon, everyone. As Amy said, my name is Catherine Grimes, and I'm the Senior Program Officer at the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation. And I have the privilege of being the co-creator and then the program officer over the Robert A. Winn Diversity in Clinical Trials Award Program. And so I'm thrilled to talk to you about it today. You might also hear us call this the Winn Awards for short. There are 2 awards under this program, as Amy mentioned, one targeting early stage investigator physicians and one targeting medical students. So I'm going to take you through the Career Development Award for ESI physicians, and then I'll hand it over to Joy to take you through the Clinical Investigator Pathway Program for med students. So next slide, please. So first, just a level set. What is the goal? What is the purpose? Why are we doing this? Why are we investing $100 million to diversify the clinical investigator workforce. So we set out with a vision, and we do have a big, bold vision, and we really are aiming to transform the clinical research landscape by building and strengthening partnerships with clinical investigators and the communities where their patients reside, with a goal ultimately of engaging a patient population that mirrors the epidemiology of the disease studied. And that is really how we're defining diversity in clinical trials, to more closely with this goal of more closely having the patient population that mirrors the epidemiology of the disease studied. And so on the left, we know we're nowhere near that now. We know that Black Americans represent about 13% of the population, but only participate in about 3% of clinical trials. And Hispanics that represent 16% of the population are only represented in about 4% of clinical trials. Currently, over 80% of clinical trial participants are white. So that's really the crux of the problem. And then how are we going to get there? How are we going to transform the clinical research landscape? Well, through these two different awards. First, by training. Amy mentioned 250. It's now 290 because Gilead Sciences has joined our effort in years 2 through 4 with an additional 10 scholars. So initially, the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation was going to train 50 new clinical investigators per year for 5 years, a total of 250, and now we're adding on 40 additional from Gilead. New clinical investigators with both research and community outreach and engagement skills. We think the training we're providing is unique, not only to various other clinical trial investigator training programs that are out there, but really to medical education in general. We just really haven't seen community outreach and engagement as part and parcel to any physician provider education training, and that's absolutely embedded into our 2-year career development award, which we're calling the Winn CDA. Additionally, we are seeking to engage 290 underrepresented in medicine medical students in clinical research through a 6-week clinical investigator pathway program. We're calling that the Winn CIPP award. And then finally, to enhance the capability of existing clinical trial sites in communities with significant health disparities through an infrastructure fund. So that's an overview of the program, and I'll now just take you through some details on the Career Development Award. If I can have the next slide, please. And the next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, the Winn Award program is comprised of 2 awards. This first piece will be focused on the Career Development Award. The overall program is a commitment of $100 million over 5 years from the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation, an additional $14 million over 4 years from Gilead Sciences. And we are actively in talks with Amgen and other companies that are like-minded that also feel that this is a fantastic program. And if the more trainees we can put out with this sort of training, the closer we'll be to achieving our goal of transforming the clinical research landscape. So the commitment I just mentioned is to train a new generation of 290 community-oriented clinical investigators, also to provide early clinical research exposures to 290 underrepresented in medicine medical students, and then to build the capacity in diverse communities through an infrastructure fund. The Career Development Award for early stage investigator physicians are $120K for 2 years, so $240K in total. We are providing training. It's not just an award where we're funding their research. We're also providing intense training over the 2 years. The scholars will start their 2 years with a 6-day intensive, what we're calling design and implementation of clinical trial workshops. That's being led by the AACR. And then we'll continue to engage them over 2 years in biweekly scholar forums. And we're calling this the community-oriented clinical trialists curriculum. Every other week, they'll be meeting with lectures with faculty and doing some community outreach assignments in their own communities. Career development is absolutely also a critical element to this award, and the award, that's hence it's why it's an award program and not just an award. Intense professional development planning being led by Joy and her team at VCU Massey, mentored career planning and tracking with experienced clinical investigator, and then their own self-assessment in terms of sort of where they are and where they want to go in terms of engaging community in their research. Mentoring, we have a tiered mentoring model that was also one of the barriers that we uncovered in our early research as to why our underrepresented in medicine physicians aren't engaging in clinical research at the same rate as their white matched counterparts. And so we're really building intense mentoring in as well. Not only will the scholars be mentored by a principal investigator, they have to apply with this mentor, but they will also then have a chance to be a mentor to one of the med students that is coming along through the CIPP program. And then finally, the capacity building piece, where there will be some investment in infrastructure in certain community sites. So next slide, please. So this is the eligibility criteria. First is our definition of underrepresented in medicine. So you will see so this is not solely based on race and ethnicity. So you can either meet this definition of underrepresented in medicine. You can self-identify as African American or Black, Hispanic, Latino, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders, or one of these other Southeast Asian categories. Or if you don't self-identify as one of these racial and ethnic minority categories, if you have a demonstrated commitment to increasing diverse patient participation in clinical trials, you can also be eligible to apply. You will just have to represent that demonstrated commitment in the application. Citizenship is primarily U.S. citizen, although we are also awarding O1 and or HB1B visa holders as long as their visa is active through the full period. The professional degree at this time, eligible candidates for this award are either MD, MD PhD, or DO PhD. And then the career path is early stage investigator as defined by the NIH. So they have completed either their terminal research degree or medical residency, whichever is later, within the last 10 years, and have not yet competed successfully or for substantial competing NIH research grants. Next slide. So we have just completed recruitment for our cohort 2. So this is what the cohort 1 demographics look like. Cohort 1 we announced last October. We are very pleased with our diversity numbers coming in at about 37% equally for Black, African American, and Hispanic Latino. We did not see any American Indian, Alaskan Natives, or Pacific Islanders. And then 14% were in that other category. They did not meet this URM definition, but they did have a demonstrated commitment to the work, and you can see their racial and ethnic profiles over on the right for those 14. We were also majority female, which we were pleased with because females are also underrepresented in clinical research. The degree distribution in cohort 1 was primarily MD. We did have a few MD PhDs and no DO or DO PhDs. Specialty was by far and away cancer, solid tumor, followed by hematology, oncology, cardiovascular disease, and immunologic disorders. Very well represented nationally. Could definitely probably do better in the Midwest and other areas, but we feel really good about the geographic distribution as well. The next slide are just the institutions where these 52 from cohort 1 came from. I'll just flash that briefly. We don't need to spend a lot of time on it. You will see that it is mostly the academic teaching centers. We do have an HBCU, we have a VA. We do want to see more diversity in the institutions where these scholars are coming from over time, but we also have to realize that it could be a chicken or an egg situation where we might not be getting a lot of researchers from community settings because they don't yet have capacity and capability. They're not doing a lot of community research. So maybe some of that infrastructure needs to come on first, but we're definitely going to sort of sharpen our lens around, are we missing this as an recruitment opportunity to bring in more researchers from community settings? The next slide is a repeat of what you just saw, but for cohort 2, which we just finished selection. We're just in the process of contracting these scholars and haven't even announced. We'll be announcing later in October, cohort 2. But again, diversity numbers look great, and we had more African American this year than last. Remember, that was an even split between Hispanics and Blacks this year, a little bit more weighted toward Black, but we still have a good representation of Latino. We do have an American Indian, Alaskan Native, and we still do not have any Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders. And we've got 30% other. Again, you can see the self-identification racial categories of these 19 other on the right. Again, we are more heavily female than male. And we did pick up a few DO PhDs this year compared to last year. Again, primarily cancer as the research area of focus, cardiovascular and immunologic disorders also represented. We really think that has a lot to do with just the amount of research that's going on in cancer right now. We just think there's a lot more research and discovery going on in cancer right now than in the other fields, but we are going to make sure that we're not missing some great candidates in the other research areas as well. And again, very well represented across the country. Next slide again are the institutions. Again, primarily the usual suspects. We do again have, I think, 2 HBCUs this year and 1 or 2 community sites. But again, we want to continue to diversify the sites where these researchers come from. Just have a few more slides here. So the next one, I believe, is our advisory board. Some of you may know some of these advisors. If you have want any just sort of third party independent information about our program, certainly reach out. These are an incredibly dedicated team of advisors who've advised us right along from just putting the program together through to now helping us on our independent selection committee and serving as mentors to many of our scholars. They're just an incredibly dedicated group of individuals, stellar clinicians and academicians who are helping us on this path. And the last 2 slides are a little bit about our training. So if you remember, I said the first 6 days that they're in the program, they do attend this intensive design and implementation of clinical trials workshop. You see the program co-chairs here, Roy Herbst, Yu Shur, and Dr. Winn. And then again, a stellar steering committee that is helping them to put that 6-day intensive together. And in fact, we are going to be out in Santa Monica, California for the design and implementation workshop in November for cohort 2. So this is the group really steering that curriculum and putting that training together. And my last slide is just a bit about that unique training that I mentioned at the beginning. We are offering, in addition to sort of the high science and all the usual biostats and et cetera of how to conduct and run a clinical trial, this added focus on community outreach and engagement, so that we are really training this new generation of world-class trialists that possess this additional knowledge, skills, and competencies to foster active community engagement in clinical and translational research. And we just don't think this has really ever been the physician's job heretofore. It's been the navigator, maybe a research assistant or a nurse navigator, but the physician has never really sort of been trained to or asked to understand how to map a community. Where are the community assets? How do you leverage community? How do you engage with community and bring their voice into the research? And so we really do think that that's another one of the aspects that's just really unique to this program. So I'm going to stop there. That's just a very high-level overview of the Career Development Award for early stage investigator physicians. And Joy will now take you through the Clinical Investigator Pathway Program for underrepresented in medicine medical students. Feel free to put any questions you have in the chat or Q&A along the way. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Catherine. So hello, everyone. As Catherine said, I am Joy Jones. I am the Chief Program Officer at VCU Massey Cancer Center and oversee implementation of the Winn Awards there. So I'm really happy to share with you about the Winn Clinical Investigator Pathway Program for medical students. Next slide. Yeah, so the mission and purpose of this program is to provide exposures to underrepresented in medicine medical students so that they can explore pathways to become community-oriented clinical trialists, as really as part of our larger goal to increase equity and diversity in the clinical and translational research landscape. So the CIPP is a 6-week summer immersion externship for underrepresented medicine medical students who have completed their first year of school. Students are placed in community-based research sites for 3 main types of experiences. And so the first is clinical research exposures, where they have the opportunity to meet clinical investigators and really to observe how clinical research is conducted with patients in community-based settings. Second is community engagement. So it's some practical hands-on experience in community engagement, really by means of working on team-based service learning projects where there's opportunities to support the community-based research activities at their host sites. For example, by participating in ongoing or existing clinical trials or other research studies, conducting community needs assessments, or designing and implementing education initiatives around participation in clinical trials. And finally, students will explore community-oriented research leadership. So as part of the overall Winn Awards, as Catherine mentioned, there is this tiered mentorship model. So the students are matched with one-to-one with a Winn CDA scholar for mentoring during the course of the summer program. Students are able to discuss, really explore career pathways in clinical research and opportunities that they see from their mentors about ways to lead efforts to increase diversity in the field and in their work. They also have the opportunity to meet with community-oriented clinical research leaders for similar sorts of conversations in their placement cities, at their sites, and in the broader local community. So we also hold program-wide national webinars that are focused on topics related to increasing diversity in clinical trials. And then we facilitate city-based learning days in collaboration with our site partners to bring students together from the different partner sites for additional learning and to particularly explore the clinical research landscape in that city. What are the challenges and the issues for working with and engaging communities? And what are the organizations doing to reach underserved communities and vulnerable populations? Overall, our hope is that this experience, these exposures and opportunities to network will show our students that there are different pathways for them to explore to become future-oriented clinical trial researchers, and to really start thinking about the things that they should be doing while they're in medical school to start preparing for those pathways. Next slide. And to look at the key program elements. So as Catherine mentioned, with funding from the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation and Gilead Sciences, the commitment is to provide these experiences to 290 medical students underrepresented in medicine over the 5 years. Again, it's a 6-week summer externship that occurs in June and July of each summer. We are currently planning the dates for the 2023 season. And this year we are exploring having 2 overlapping program schedules to accommodate the different academic calendars of medical schools across the country. The award is $7,500 for each scholar, which is really intended to serve as a stipend to cover the cost of travel, lodging, and living expenses during the course of the period. So this is a national program, and we have our different program cities. So students apply from all over the country, and then they are placed in one of the different program cities. So students are hosted by our city-based site partners, which are community-based clinical research organizations such as a CTSA or NCORE site, or academic institutions that are engaged in community-based clinical research. So the sites, our site hosts receive a grant of $3,600 per student that they host, really to offset the administrative costs of program implementation. They identify a primary site supervisor who is designated to really oversee the site-specific program development and planning, which includes the program structure, scheduling, and to manage the on-site logistics and implementation of when the students are there. What I also see is missing from this slide is that there is a symposium, which is really important. So this is where we bring all of the students from across the country together for a 1.5-day symposium to learn, share, and network. We have distinguished local speakers in one of the program cities, and then there are opportunities for skills building and workshops, networking, and community building. So in our first year, our program cities were Atlanta, New Orleans, San Antonio, Seattle, and St. Louis, and we're reviewing the cities for our upcoming summer. We do have an opportunity with the higher number of students to expand. So we'll likely renew some of these cities, but then also identify some new cities for this summer. And so we'll have that information on the program website as we finalize those. And again, as Catherine mentioned, the students are matched with Winn CDA scholars for the virtual mentoring sessions that take place during the 6-week program. And based on our feedback from our first group, we're exploring ways to really be able to enhance and enrich that mentoring experience for both the students and the scholars. We're looking at doing some group mentoring sessions next summer and other ways to continue engagement beyond the 6 weeks. So what we really hope is that the 6 weeks is an opportunity to sort of lay the groundwork for a longer term mentoring relationship that will go while the students are throughout their academic programs, and for the scholars as they're in the program. The next slide shows eligibility for the students. So eligible students are coming from underrepresented groups underrepresented in medicine, mirroring the same categories as the Career Development Award. Students must be US citizens or have DACA status. And this is open to first, second, and third year medical students who are enrolled in US accredited medical schools. The next slide just shows us a little bit about our first group of students. So this past summer, there were 44, mostly African-American, about 52%, again, more weighted towards females, and also more weighted towards medical students, although we had almost 30% of DOs. And the next slide again shows the geographic distribution, which is pretty solid. And we had a few schools where we had a number of multiple scholars that participated. So you see Morehouse School of Medicine, University of South Carolina, School of Medicine, Greenville, LSU, and Keck University in Southern California. And the final slide, this is a picture of our first cohort. And so you can see the diversity of this group of future, we hope, community-oriented clinical trialists. And there we go.
Thank you so much, Joy and Catherine. That was fantastic. I am now going to moderate a Q&A session. Joy and Catherine, if you don't mind turning on your cameras so that we can have a conversation. There it is. Fantastic. So my first question is, who selects the awardees? What's the applicant pool like? Who selects the awardees? When do they find out? Things like that.
Yeah, I'll start, and then Joy is going to provide even more detail because she's closer to it. So it's a completely independent selection committee. So neither of the funding sponsors, Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation nor Gilead, have a role at all in selection. We do have an independent selection committee, largely that national advisory committee that I showed you photos of, but because we've had so many applicants, we have had to recruit more reviewers. So colleagues from various institutes across the NIH and NCI have been incredibly generous with their time and really eager to participate. So the majority of the additional non-formal national, advisors to the program, reviewers, have come from NIH and NCI and or their recommendations. I believe we had both years, we had around 135 that submitted a letter of inquiry. It was a two-step application process. We're moving to a one-step application process going forward. But in both years, again, around 112 plus or minus of those were invited to then complete the full application. And I believe we had 68 complete in year one and closer to 78 or 80 complete in year two, of which then we selected our two cohorts, the 52 and the 64. And that's the other thing, even though we said we're budgeted at 50 per year, now 60 per year with Gilead. If we have more good applicants than are budgeted for that year, we're going to accept them into the program because we're going for 250 over 5 years. So we're not limiting to just the 50, 50, 50. If we have more good applicants and we can get them in there sooner, that's great. We also found we had in cohort one, we've had one or two drop out. One has already received a significant NIH award that does not allow them to participate 40% in our program. And another is went on to an entrepreneurial venture to try to really take some of their research and commercialize it. So, we anticipate some dropout along the way. So we started at 52 with cohort one. We're now back to 50. We're starting with 64 with cohort two. We may be back to 60 before we know it. So that was another reason why. But so it's completely independent, and I'll let Joy talk more about them.
And the other part to that is that if we happen to have a pool that there aren't that many strong candidates, we're not being held to a quota. So, we're doing it really based on the merit of the applicant and, whether they are a really good, strong, solid fit. As Catherine said, the review process, it's fairly in-depth and following sort of a modified NIH review process. So we have this distinguished sort of panel of NIH, HHS, and our National Advisory Committee reviewers that we have them broken down into different study sections, and we bring each study section together in a group, and they're broken down, and we discuss each applicant, and then they're rated and put on a scale, and then we have a committee that is the sort of selection committee that has a representative or a couple representatives from each of the study sections to go through the full list and rank them. And then we have a final executive committee to do the final listing of awards. And part of that too is part of this, we are looking to ensure that we do have good representation across all of the different elements. So racial, ethnic, by gender, geographic distribution, as we can to the different types of institutions. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty in-depth process. And so, we are looking at ways to try to streamline it and make it, more reasonable for the reviewers in terms of their time. But we feel like it's really been solid, and each applicant gets a very strong chance has a very strong chance that each one is reviewed by at least 2 reviewers, and then they're discussed at least 2 times beyond that.
Fantastic. It sounds like they're both very robust and fair review programs. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll ask. I do have others. Yes, you will be able to get a copy of the slides. In fact, this is a recorded webinar, and so we will soon send out the recorded webinar, which has the slides in them. The other question is a little longer, so I'll just read it. Thank you for the session. I'd like to know, how can a 2nd and 3rd year medical student join the program and meet the 6-week summer commitment, given that 2nd year medical students spend their summer studying for the US MLE step 1
2
and step 2.
Yeah, so it's really the program was initially intended to target rising 2nd year medical students. So they've completed their 1st year, and we found that most of the time, that is the one window of time left for medical students to be able to participate in this kind of 6-week long program. But again, for medical schools have different schedules, and students are able to negotiate different things over the summer. And so for that, we did want to open it up to those students who are able to work it out in their schedules, to do it in their between their 2nd and 3rd year, and between their 3rd and 4th year. There are some that can. It's a fewer number of them. I would say in general, about 80% are going to be rising 2nd year students, just because of scheduling. But for those who have the interest and can work it out, they are invited.
Thank you. That's very helpful. You mentioned that you do have a predominantly cancer-focused research group, if I'm remembering roughly 60%, and yet you are looking to ensure that all of the different groups are represented. Can you speak a little bit more to the other fields outside of cancer and what you're doing to reach those populations?
Yeah, and again, I'll start, and then Joy, you can talk too. So we just pulled our the partners together, and what we consider partners on this program would be Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation, Gilead Sciences, AACR, and VCU Massey. And we had an entire section dedicated to, what are we missing? What, who have we not gotten the word out to? And just a significant focus on cardiovascular and immunologic disorders. Cardiovascular was a little bit of an easier conversation because it is sort of a contained, they've got, there's organizations, there's the Black Cardiology Association, there's the different medical associations that focus on cardiology, there's the AHA. When you talk about immunologic disorders, because those are really, when our definition is any immune modulated disorder. So this could be anything from, this could be RA to psoriasis to some neurologic disorders. So it really is sort of dispersed, and it's just a little bit harder to sort of pinpoint where, we might find groups that could get the word out to early stage investigator physicians who are interested in doing research in these therapeutic areas. And so all of our National Advisory Committee, as well as our partners, have really made it a priority to really think through their own networks and make sure that we're all doing very targeted outreach. We have a targeted outreach plan with who's on point for reaching out for what. Is it going to be a high touch, a low touch? Are we going to go to them directly and do webinars for their organizations like PhRMA? Are we going to organize webinars and invite all to come to us, and a mix of both? Are we going to go on a road show? Dr. Winn is actually going to go on the road to certain organizations and even institutions and really make sure that he's getting the word out. So we definitely want to make sure that anyone who's eligible for this program and interested at least knows about it and has the opportunity to decide for themselves if they want to apply.
Clearly, you're not one team for applicants. You've got many of them, but it's great that you're doing that broader outreach. I appreciate it. So we do also run programs, and we select about 40 from 400 in 4 programs. And there are certain things that make an applicant stand out in our programs. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what makes an application package stand out for your programs?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Joy, because I'm not involved at all in selection. I don't see the packages.
That's right. And by the way, I don't either. I'm just there though.
We don't even come in until the very end. But yeah, Joy.
Yeah, for this program in particular, for the Career Development Award and sitting through now 2 rounds of reviews with the committees, one of the things that is really important from the individual applicant perspective is the ability to really articulate why it is that they want to participate in this program. So what is it about understanding the challenges of increasing diversity in clinical trials, why that's important, and why the interest in learning strategies for community outreach and engagement and working with communities. So from an individual applicant perspective, that is something that is very important as the reviewers are looking at the personal statements, particularly for those who are not coming from one of the underrepresented in medicine groups, for the applicant to be able to articulate, why they're passionate about this. And I heard that particularly in this round from the reviewers is, they're looking to hear or to be able to see that passion from the applicant. Another very, very critical part of this is the mentorship plan and the thought that's going into that. So as Catherine mentioned, the applicants have to apply to the program with a mentor. And so in that, having a very, very a well-written statement from the mentor about how he or she intends to work with the applicant, work with the scholar, both on the clinical trial side, on the clinical research side of it, but also very importantly, the career development side of it. Institutional support. So, we recognize that protected time is very hard to get, even when it's promised. The physicians often still have to fight for it. And so in the application, a really strong, clear letter of support from the institution is not only required, but is looked at very closely by the reviewers. So, just a simple letter saying, that they're going to give the time isn't enough. Several of them were questioned. In this round, we even went back to some of the applicants and said, we need something more. And so they had to come back with a stronger letter of support from the institution or a more detailed mentorship plan from their mentor.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate that. I have no other questions, and I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. Do you have any final comments before I wrap up?
Yeah, I would just say for anyone interested in more information, if we didn't answer a question that maybe you have, maybe someone who's going to watch this on recording, we do have a website where you can go, which will, excuse me, also list when the application rounds are opening for both the Career Development Award and the CIPP, and it's very easy to remember. It is www.diversityinclinicaltrials.org. So I would encourage anyone who wants more information to follow us there.
Thank you so much. So Emily, if we can move to, I'd be remiss if I didn't identify the PhRMA Foundation supporters, and I want to thank Catherine and Joy for going first. We hope to get the various pipeline programs from these other companies highlighted as well as we move through this series. So thank you so much for being first. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for the opportunity, Amy.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And for those of you who may be interested, our next one is tips for writing a winning grant application. And Dr. Peter Newman is specifically a health outcomes researcher and also a value assessment researcher. And so he will be focusing a little bit on that, but it is also a preview again of the webinar series. We will be having this type of program for all of our different buckets, so stay tuned to that. Next slide. We at the PhRMA Foundation are very easy to find. Here is our contact information. That might be it. There it is. Well, thank you so much for participating today, and I hope you have a wonderful day.